Welcome to this short screencast. My name is Laura and I work in the Learning Development Service. This second in the series of 3 screencasts is entitled How to Study 2 and it specifically deals with writing skills. To start with, we'll include some hints and tips for essay writing. Then we'll go on to look at referencing and how you can avoid plagiarism. We'll look first at some hints and tips for essay writing. This video will remain available for you when you're preparing your essays, so you may find it useful to come back and check on some of the tips provided. It's important to think of an essay not necessarily just as a chore, but also an opportunity. It's a chance for you to explore a topic in detail and for you to reach and argue your own informed conclusions. It's also a chance to conduct some independent research on a particular area and therefore to deepen and broaden your own subject knowledge. It's also a chance to develop your writing skills, and these will become and continue to be important throughout your degree. So this is a chance to keep developing those. You'll also have the chance to receive feedback on those writing skills. The first part of responding to a title or an essay question is ultimately understanding it. First of all, identify the broad topic, then defining the key terms. So what do the key terms in your question mean? For instance, looking at what analyze might mean versus discuss versus evaluate. So it's important that you define what the question is asking. Next, you need to analyze the question. So identify any implicit assumptions that may be included. And also then to actually analyze what it is you're being asked to do. And it's really key then that you keep that title in front of you, both as you research and as you write, but then that you check back regularly, for instance, at the end of every paragraph you write, just to make sure that you're continuing to respond to that question. Here we have a sample question. Discuss how novels, autobiographies and historical documents compare and add to an academic analysis of the Holocaust. It's important when you receive a title like this to identify those key terms. So, namely, discuss, compare and add to an academic analysis. Your broad subject matter is the Holocaust, and the particular genre that you're looking at are the novels, autobiographies and historical documents alongside that academic analysis. The next step when you're responding to an essay title or question is in conducting some research. So you've identified the broad subject matter of the topic of the question. The next thing then is to collate some research materials. Your first step will be to make a reading list, and you can add to that from your module reading list, which will contain some relevant readings. You can also conduct your own search on the Queen's Library catalogue, and that will link you to good quality, reliable academic resources that are available to you as a Queen's student. When you're conducting your research, especially if you're searching for materials online, for instance through Google Scholar or on other search engines, it's key that you're employing your critical reading skills. So assess how valuable, how reliable, how relevant materials are, and whether they are worthy of inclusion if they're a good enough academic standard. So be very critical about the information that you receive. And once you have details of these readings or access to materials, make sure that you're taking focused and relevant notes on your readings, picking out the quotations or points or concepts that are most relevant to your question. It's also important here to note that you should keep a record of the biographical details so that you can then reference them easily. Very often it's easy to make notes and lose the particular reference that you had. That can mean that you waste time on your reference list. So it's easiest just to keep a note of the biographical details of the materials as you go. As part of the critical reading skills that you will be required to have, it's important that you think about evaluating those sources. So not only relevance, but also accuracy, whether there's anything in it that can be fact-checked, whether they're using evidence from other academic sources to support their points. Thinking about the author, whether that's an expert or whether that's just, for instance, a blog post with opinion. Also considering the purpose, whether that's to inform you, whether that's to persuade, whether that's coming from a particular bias, for instance. And also the currency. It's important that you're using the most up-to-date sources. In the humanities, that may not be as urgent an issue as, for example, in the sciences, but it's always important to look to see if something has been written more recently that responds to an older piece of research, for instance. The next step is in planning your essay, and planning is absolutely key to producing a good, solid, well-argued essay. This is where you really should think about your argument. So think about your well-reasoned and clearly structured argument, which then brings you to a very logical conclusion. The best thing is to state your argument as clearly and explicitly as possible, and then produce evidence for this way of seeing things throughout your essay. This then provides momentum and ensures that you're coming to a logical conclusion and that there are no surprises. Think about the structure when you're planning your essay. So your introduction really is where you're signposting your main points and the areas that you're going to discuss throughout. Your main body then should outline the key points that you want to make in a logical order in a way that builds momentum. So for instance, maybe your weaker points first, building to your most convincing arguments. And ensure here you've got one key point per paragraph rather than cramming too much information in each paragraph. Your conclusion then is the space really for your evaluation and your commentary on the points that you've covered. At this stage, if you're having problems with planning or structuring, you can absolutely book an appointment with the Learning Development Service. And there's a link here to the My Future platform, which will allow you to book an appointment with us. We can review a draft of an essay and perhaps offer some advice around academic writing. When it comes to drafting your essay, the key is really to write it, draft it, redraft it, edit it, rework it. So go through as many iterations as you need in order to perfect it. One thing to be sure of is that you're guiding your reader through the essay with signposting. So you're telling the reader what you're going to do, so it will outline, examine, establish, clarify, that you're marking key transitions, so your first key point, your second key point, etc. And then that you're concluding logically, clearly, and with the benefit of evidence supporting your argument. The PEAL acronym is really valuable here in helping you to structure each of your paragraphs. These should each have a mini kind of structure of introduction, main body and conclusion, and you might structure a paragraph according to PEAL. So P, giving your point, E, giving your evidence, supporting your point with examples or with supporting material. E, explanation, so elaborating a little bit more, explaining how the evidence supports the point that you've given, and then linking either to the following point in your next paragraph or potentially back to your main question, illuminating how this relates back to the overall question or to the overall topic. When it comes to editing and redrafting, there are a series of checks that you should make for your work. Try to be as objective as possible, and sometimes it's easier if you go away from the essay for a short period of time if you have that time and come back to it so you can check it more objectively. So some of the checks you might make are whether it makes sense, putting yourself in the shoes of an external reader, thinking about how logical it is, do the paragraphs build towards a clear conclusion, whether you've answered the question is really key, whether you've covered all of your main points. An important area, especially if you're slightly over your word limit, is cutting out repetition. So anything that relates to the same point, you can highlight and perhaps cut down. And finally then looking at referencing. So referencing if it's correct, but also if you've included your reference list at the end. Ways of proofreading then. One way of doing it yourself is to read it out loud, and this will mean that you stumble over any issues, any places where the sentences don't quite merge, where the syntax is a little off. You can ask family, friends, peers to proofread it for you, perhaps not so much for the subject-specific content, but for the flow. You might also want to check finally for grammar, for spelling, and for punctuation as well. Looking now at referencing and avoiding plagiarism. So thinking about plagiarism and referencing. First, it's important to define plagiarism. The Oxford English Dictionary considers it to be the action or practice of taking someone else's work, idea, etc., and passing it off as one's own. Ultimately, this amounts to kind of theft, intellectual property theft. The most important thing to know is that you can avoid plagiarism by acknowledging your sources at all times. Anywhere that you've taken a statement, an opinion, an idea, a conclusion, a theory, and the application of a theory from another author's work has to be referenced. The benefit of referencing other authors' work is also that it supports your own statements and your own points. It shows that you have backed up your points by reference to other scholarly work. In terms of referencing systems, it's important to check with your module tutor which system or style you're asked to use for a particular module. There are many different referencing styles. There are two key elements. You have either in-text citations or footnotes, and then a reference list. And the way that you format references, whether that's a book, a journal article, whether that is an online source, depends on the type of source you have. So the first step is to identify the type of source and then to follow the recipe for the particular referencing style you're using. The final reference list is basically a list of all the sources you have consulted that comes at the end of your work. One example of a referencing system is the Harvard in-text citation system. So in this system, the author's surname and date comes in the brackets within the sentence. So this is just one example. An alternative type of referencing system is the Irish Historical Studies system. This requires footnotes. So as you'll see here, a footnote occurs in subscript in the main body of the work, relevant to the source that will be mentioned after, for instance, a particular point or a quotation, and this is then carried through with a short footnote at the bottom of the page that gives the detail. The bibliography or works cited supplements the information you've provided in your footnotes and allows a reader to consult the sources that you have referenced in your essay for verification. There are some key points. Firstly, that the works should be arranged in alphabetical order according to the author's surname. And the surname comes first and the first name comes second after a comma. Secondly, entries aren't numbered and they also don't need to be put in bullet points. They must also be formatted correctly. For instance, a book title must always appear in italics. And it's important that you check how different sources should be formatted. And page numbers should be given where appropriate. For instance, for a journal article, it doesn't span the full length of the journal. You give the page numbers there where it's a particular span. The Learning Development Service offers support for academic writing. Firstly, through online resources, which includes our essay writing guide, our Cite to Write reference generator, and many other resources, for example, a critical reading template. These are found at the link here. The second way in which we support your academic writing is through one-to-one appointments. You can bring along a draft of your assignment for non-subject specific developmental feedback, and we can troubleshoot particular problems, for instance, if you're having trouble with referencing or with structure. Links to the My Future, where you can book an appointment, is below. This is the second in a series of 3 how to study guides. The third one will be on finding your voice at university. Thanks for your attention, good luck, and I hope to see you soon.